2. The day had started like thousands before it. Sian was serving the breakfasts in the dining room when Emma had come in for a shift, not exactly at her best. Another night on her quest to find Mr. Right had resulted in a row of Mr. Right nows. Sian knew she'd get the full story, warts and all, when breakfast service was over and the cleaning started. She was emptying the waste paper basket in room 8 when Emma walked in with a bag of fresh miniature toiletries. "All done in the dining room. Your mum's finishing off in the kitchen with Janet," Emma said. Sian watched Emma sit on the bed and knew what was coming next. "I am whacked," Emma explained. Sian put the bin down with its fresh bag. "So, a good night with, what's his name, Mr. iPhone?" Emma's latest mission period in her perpetual quest for Mr. Right had been the geek phase, her logic being, the more geek, the more grateful. Some geeks, according to Emma's logic, were not gamers but programmers, and could be much richer than their gaming counterparts, and she unashamedly wanted a part of that. The practice had been very different to the plan. Emma's looks had frightened most of them off with a "come and get me, all you gotta do is ask" message. She was so tired of waiting to be chased that she chased them, sending 99% of them running home to Mummy's basement. A few braver ones had put their toe in the water, but they couldn't get over the feeling that this is too good to be true. But this latest one, Mr. iPhone, as Emma had nicknamed him, was showing more promise. He and Emma had been dating a few months now, a record for Emma. He was a full card-carrying gamer, and Emma had often complained about being sidelined by the latest game or technology. But he couldn't resist the girls, as Emma called her ample chest. Mr. iPhone had developed some app for the iPhone that was starting to make big waves in the gamers' community that Emma could not and did not want to understand. Emma explained she'd met Mr. iPhone through her other job, working as a remote call centre worker for some public relations firm from her flat. He was, apart from his geek aspects, a nice guy by all accounts, if a little eccentric, and was currently treating Emma decently. Despite the protests that men are only good for their money, and if they're decent people, that's just a nice bonus, Sian knew Emma. They'd grown up together, more sisters than best friends, and it was very much the other way round for her. "Gianni's again?" Sian inquired, referring to the latest popular bouquet restaurant in the Swansea Bay area. Emma blew out a deep breath and replied, "No, not this time. We went to Beethoven's. There was that new indie band, the Wolf Song, playing, and it was the last time I'll be seeing him and his boyfriend." "Boyfriend?" Sian asked. Emma took another inward deep breath and started her story. "We went to the club and were sitting at the bar having a few drinks, listening to the band. This guy came up to us and said hello, and my God, he was drop-dead gorgeous, with a surf boy vibe going on. I half wished Tim, aka Mr. iPhone, wasn't there, so I could trade up. Tim shook Surf Boy's hand and introduced him to me as Miles. We started making small talk and listening to the band and swapped notes on gigs we'd all been to. After about half an hour of this, Miles excused himself and went to the gents. It was then Tim shocked me. He asked if I liked him. I said, of course, he seems like a nice guy. No, he said. Do you like him? As in, would he, fancy fulfilling that fantasy of yours we talked about the other night in bed? Sian's eyes went to saucers. Emma continued her story. Well, Sian, you could have knocked me down with a feather. 2 guys paying me double attention. You bet your bottom dollar I was up for it. Miles came back from the gents and took a sip of his drink. Tim nodded at Miles. I got that tingly feeling and a little damp just to the thought of what was about to happen when I looked at Miles. He must have seen the blush on my face. It felt like it was on fire. As I took a suggestive sip from my drink, he smiled, and the penny dropped. He said, I take it Tim's told you, and you're okay with it? I went into my shy schoolgirl act, and I could see he was doing the trick in his trousers. Tim asked, 1 more round, guys, and then we can get a taxi. He turned to attract a bartender. You know how busy it can get at Beethoven's. Sian nodded. She'd been there a few times with Emma, but she'd always felt like a fish out of water. Beethoven's had a justified reputation for its live music, but was also known as being a parachute club. You were guaranteed a jump. Emma continued. The band finished a set and a group of people left the dance floor and came over to the bar to get drinks. Miles moved closer to me on my stool to let them get closer to the bar. I asked him, have you ever done anything like this before? He shook his head and we stared into each other's eyes. I said, I haven't done anything like this either. Sian laughed. You liar! Emma gave Sian a coy smile. He must have been thinking about all the porno films and erotic books and was wondering how to start. I thought to myself, let's get this party started. So I ran my hand up the inside of his thigh. This broke the dam. He did not need any more encouragement. He leaned in for a kiss. Our bodies entwined as we kissed. But it was then that Tim turned around with my drink. He saw us and said, "Wow, guys, wait for me." Miles and myself separated, and Tim handed me my fresh drink, then gave Miles a bottle of beer, as Tim took a swig from his own beer. Oh, and I was wearing my red midi, deep plunge back Don and Gary dress. Sian looked confused. Emma laughed. You know Don and Gary's dress boutique and their speciality of emulating Dolce & Gabbana. Sian, clicking her fingers, replied, "Oh, I know their boutique. The mobile one looks a bit like a rusty old Ford Transit. Normally found round the back of the King Arms pub." That's the one. Well, my dress was low-backed, and Tim ran two of his fingers up and down my exposed spine, sending waves of sensations through my body. Miles came back in for another kiss, which I readily reciprocated. I could feel his excited manhood pressing on my leg as we kissed, with Miles stroking my spine. My brain registered another sensual onslaught. As Miles was kissing me, his hand came up and started to stroke the border of my breast and chest, my nipples ardent against my bra cups to a sweet pain. Tim put down his drink at some point, and it started to kiss slowly up my shoulder to the base of my neck. This was too much for me. I pushed them both off and practically shouted, "Taxi!" Both men backed off and smiled and almost in unison said, "Oh yes." Miles took my hand to lead me outside to the taxi rank. I jumped off my bar stool. Well, I more slid off, I was that wet. As Miles led me out by the hand past the throng of patrons in Beethoven's, Tim walked behind us, and I felt his hand cup one of my bum cheeks as we waited our turn to exit the bar. Tim leaned in and said, "I love you, Winkle, and that dance shaker of yours." I thrust back onto his crotch, and in his excitement I did my quick up to 2 o'clock, down to 6 o'clock, and over to 9 o'clock. Tim groaned with the sweet man pain, and I smiled to myself as I started to follow Miles outside. As we got outside, the chill of the air hit me in my excited skin as I shivered. When I thought that the night could not get any better, well, until we got to Tim's flat anyway, it went up another notch. I noticed who the duty doorman was that night. Sian, do you remember Mr. Big all over apart from where it counts? Sian thought, then said, "Oh, not Morgan, no, Manson? Mason?" Emma nodded. "That's him. If I had been mirror-shaped, I would have been the ideal woman for him. He had seen my clock moves on Tim, and by the look on his face, it was grinding." I said, "Evening, Mason." I was waiting for some comment, and I had a ready reply for him. "Don't they issue you with hats? Your head looks cold." As you know, he was a bit sensitive about his departing heir. But he just nodded and said, "Hi, Emma," and then turned to ask for ID from some new girls who were waiting to enter the club. We walked down Duke's Way towards the taxi rank. I could feel the chill on my front as we walked, but with both men in escort on either side of me, their body heat was counteracting the cold of the night air, with the mix of alcohol and caffeine from that blue stuff in a bottle, whatever it was called, strobe or something. Anyway, I was on fire with lust. We got to the first taxi in the rank. Tim leaned down and said to the driver, "Tigweld Trife, please." The driver nodded and indicated to the back of his taxi. One of those big people carrier types. Tim opened the door and I followed him, sitting next to Tim with Miles next to me on the back seat. The taxi pulled off from the rank and started the journey to Tim's flat complex in Tigweld Trife. For about a minute we sat in silence, the eye of normality in a hurricane of lust. I asked, "Who was Gweld Trife anyway?" Tim replied it was not a who, but a what. Tigweld Trife is Welsh for Beach View House. Where I am, on the 15th floor, there's a great view of the beach along the bay and all the way to the lighthouses at the edge of the Mumbles. I was so far gone at this point, I placed a hand on each of the men's inner thighs and giggled. "Do you love the view of your bitch tonight, boys?" They replied again in unison. "Oh, yes." They both leaned in and started kissing my neck. I returned the favour by placing their hands on my inner thighs. At this point, My inner slut took the helm. I threw my head back as the guys were kissing my neck, shoulders at the top of my breasts. I opened my legs and slid down in the seat and my dress rolled up. The guys started stroking up and down my inner thighs, coming close to my vulva but not touching her. Somewhere in this lustful hurricane, a small voice of caution was telling me to remember what was making this taxi move. The driver is here, and he needs to concentrate and probably has CCTV in here as well. My inner slut bitch slapped the caution voice down, and if the taxi driver had pulled over at that point, he would have been very welcome to join in. The odds are, I am now very popular on some taxi drivers' video sharing website. Well, nothing I can do about it now. On the bright side, I'll probably get discounts in the future from drivers hoping for a sequel. Anyway, we got to Tigwald Traeth, and one very uncomfortable looking taxi driver drove off. We entered the lobby area and waited for the lift. The guys were like schoolboys waiting for Christmas at this point. Not that I blamed them. An express lift it was not at Tigwald Traeth. As I was toying with the idea of becoming popular on a lobby staff video sharing website, the lift pinged as it reached the ground floor and the doors opened. We entered, and as the doors closed, the guys gently pushed me to the back wall and started a standing version of the taxi ride. But this time I leaned in towards Tim and kissed him, as if I just wanted to consume him. Miles, unlike the taxi action, moved his finger onto the base of my vulva and straight but slowly up my slit and onto my clitoris. A little pressure on my sweet spot was all that was needed to push me over the edge. My whole body started shaking, and all my life force was pulled inward on the wave of mild pleasure. Then it was boom. The dam broke, not just literally. I soaked Miles's hand and clamped vice-like on it with my thighs. I was lost in the pleasure. It was a good job Tim was there. I was so lost that my body just gave out and I started to fall. Tim caught me and saved me from ending up as a heap on the floor. Both men held me up as the aftershocks of pleasure washed over me. As I finally found myself again and regained most of my balance, the lift pinged and the door opened on Tim's floor. We all walked across the landing floor, touching and kissing, to Tim's flat. Tim, with shaking hands, managed to unlock the door to the flat, and we all walked into the living room that was just off the front door and short hallway. The living room's main feature were 2 sofas in an L shape on hardwood flooring, while the rest of the room was what you'd expect from a techno-nerd's bachelor pad, with a massive TV and other black boxes and toys decorated with pictures and more toys. Vintage models and movie posters. Tim asked if we wanted some drinks. Miles and I said yes. As I looked around at the man toys, I heard music start up, and I looked up from my investigation of what I learned later were rare near-mint collectibles from Star something or other. I saw Miles pull out a remote for the sound system he'd just sat on. The music was some indie folk Irish music with a female singing in a language that was not English and I didn't understand. But it sounded a bit like Welsh, so I assume it was Irish Gaelic. With a mix of caffeine, alcohol, and whatever bio-drugs my brain was making, turbocharged from lust, I felt fantastic, powerful, walking on air. Then, with hypnotic vocals, I started to sway with it. I wanted to be free. I shed my dress and bra and danced there in my knickers and heels. I then remembered I was not alone. When I looked down from my cloud 9, I saw the guys seated on the sofa, silent and agog with the drinks forgotten. I said in my best husky dominatrix voice, "Well, don't just sit there. Stand! Strip!" The guys put greyhounds to shame with the speed they got off the blocks, compiling to my orders. Within seconds, I had 2 men in front of me, this time with erections. I walked around them, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor, my freed breasts bouncing a little as I walked with a purpose. Both men turned their heads to follow me. "Eyes front!" I barked at them. Both naked men returned to looking forward, and I looked at their bums, surprisingly pert for guys that spend most of their time in front of screens. I caressed both their buttocks at the same time, and again with my best husky dominatrix voice. "Not bad at all, gentlemen. Now, attention!" I walked around to face them with their manhood standing to attention. I looked at their penises. "Very good." I nodded my approval. I ran my nails gently over their scrotums, then closed my hands around their penises and slowly started to stroke them up and down. As both men had their eyes closed in their first unclothed pleasure, I took in their naked bodies fully for the first time. Tim's body I was already familiar with. His gingerhead hair, but carpet did not beat the curtains, dark pubic hair, his slender build, and the start of a middle-aged spread belly. Miles, on the other hand, was matching all over, with his fine blonde hair and a little manlier muscular V-shaped definition. Both men could be from the same mould, almost brothers. Not exactly my twin's fancy, but close enough for me to tick it off my carnal bucket list. I decided that Miles would be the lucky first. I looked at each in turn, as if the two men were playing tennis, saying, "Eeny, meeny, miny, mo." I took my hand off Miles's penis and said, "You," and pushed Miles onto the sofa. I took off my knickers and straddled and guided him inside me. The first feeling of warm, snug, fulfilling euphoria came to me like the feeling of getting into bed on a cold night with fresh sheets. I grabbed Miles and kissed him hard. I used my vaginal muscles to grip him inside me. The feeling of releasing sexual tension finally, after the first time Tim had suggested this encounter. I finished kissing Miles and changed my angle, leaning back so Miles's penis could stroke my G-spot. As I started to ride Miles, my second, paralysing orgasm overtook me. Miles groaned, burying his face in my chest. Not to be left out, Tim came over and started to run his hands all over my body, starting with my bum and working his way up my back. I turned my head to face him, greeted by a close-up of his engorged purple penis head with its seeping translucent fluid from his slit. I took hold of Tim's penis with a desire for it like I'd not eaten for days and placed it in my mouth. I tasted his salty manhood and sucked hungrily on his shaft, timing my mouth actions to Miles' thrusts inside me. Lost in my own pleasure and the desire to consume Tim, with him holding and pulling slightly on my hair, lost in his own waves of pleasure. I felt Miles grip my hips and moan loudly, and I knew he was getting close to his own orgasm. I did not want him to be spent just yet. I was far from finished with him. So I let go of Tim's erection, put my hands on Miles's chest and climbed off him. I looked down and saw his erection, still hard as a pole and proud, glistening with my fluids. I stood on shaky legs and suddenly Tim picked me up and threw me down on the opposite sofa. Tim spread my legs and pushed them up, exposing my womanhood. He then pushed his face into my vagina, his tongue thirstily exploring around the entrance and then trying to reach my womb. This pushed me over the edge again into another orgasm. As I came down from this wave of ecstasy, I opened my eyes and found Miles's erection next to my face. As with Tim's penis, I took him in my mouth, tasting his saltiness with my own musky woman taste. I worked his shaft up and down, with Tim now having given up trying to reach my womb with his tongue and now working with my clitoris. I was on the way up again to another orgasm when I felt the penis leave my mouth and my body leaving the sofa and raising into the air by one set of manly arms and another in assistance. I just closed my eyes and let myself be carried. I was placed on a double bed. I got up on my hands and knees and I manoeuvred myself to the edge and raised my hind quarters to present my womanliness to the men and plunged my face into the duvet with its smell of lavender washing powder as I waited to be filled by whichever man got there first. I was not disappointed, and I was entered by one of the men, followed by a deep, satisfied groan. The owner of the penis began his thrusting, and I thrust my rear back to his penis, matching his desperation. Lost in the pure, animalistic nature of it, I felt another orgasm start to build up. I shouted unashamedly that I was coming. This had the desired effect on the penis's owner, and his thrusts became faster and harder, arms holding my waist and pulling me closer, giving me just a little extra length inside me. This did the job, and another orgasm started to rock my body. The man holding me and filling me informed me in Miles's voice that he was going to come. I'm very considerate of Miles as a true gentleman, but I was too far gone. I shouted back, "Don't stop!" And he complied to my request, and I felt the warmth of his ejaculation inside. I slumped down, recovering, feeling Miles starting to go flaccid. As my senses came back to me, I had one penis down, and I turned around from my encounter with the second penis of the night. As I turned around, I heard Tim moan in pleasure, and it took my mind a few seconds to compute what my eyes were seeing. Emma went silent and looked out the window, fighting back tears. Sian went from a standing start, her usual reaction to Emma's intimate encounters, to 100 miles an hour of concern for her friend. Honey, what happened? Sian asked as she put a concerned hand on her shoulder. Emma took a deep breath and continued her story. In front of me, on the bed, was Miles. His penis now flaccid and weeping semen from its tip, and his blonde pubic hair darker now with my wetness. But he was not looking at me. His head was turned to his right, with Tim's hands on his head and an orgasm pulsating into Miles's mouth. I mumbled that I needed to clean up and got off the bed. What really was the cherry on the cake was the way they looked at each other. It was not the look of two people caught up in the moment. It was the look of two lovers sharing a moment. I went to the bathroom and cleaned up and wrapped a large bath towel around myself and returned to the living room. The two men were now sorting themselves out and getting dressed, and I did the same. I rang a taxi and told the guys I had work in the morning, and left to wait for the taxi outside. Emma had now finished her tale and walked into roommate's ensuite to begin toilet diving, as she called it. Normally they'd take turns doing the bathrooms, their least favourite task of their chambermaiding duties, unless they were paying back favours to each other. But Emma had already done room 7, didn't need to do room 8's toilet diving. Sian knew at times like these, when Emma was on a low from one of her adventures, it was best to keep out of her way and let her get on with it. Just be close at hand. Sooner or later she'd want to talk and dissect the night's events down to the smallest details in the post-date autopsy. Sian had to admit to herself that of the downs Emma had had in her adventures over the years, this one had to be one of the top 5. It was in uncharted waters. Not that Emma was in any way homophobic. Far from it. Her own brother Steve was gay, and, as Emma put it, our Steve is camper than a camping site on a sunny bank holiday. She had even had a few adventurous woman-on-woman encounters over the years.